I woke up to the sound of my own voice playing back at me. It was the middle of the night, and the studio lights were dim, but I could see the faces of my friends and bandmates in the shadows. We were in RCA Studio B in Nashville, and I was listening to a recording of a song we just finished. It was for the millionth and the last time, and it didn't sound right. I knew it, and I could tell they knew it too. The Latin dance feel was tripping us up, and the song felt a bit stale. Maybe it was the new band lineup. Hank Garland, my go-to guitarist, had been in a car accident and couldn't play anymore. Jerry Kennedy was trying to fill his shoes, but it wasn't the same. Scotty Moore, my old friend, was back on lead guitar, but even he couldn't bring the fire we needed. I chuckled to myself as I watched Gordon Stoker, our accordion player, sweating it out. "Damn, Gordon," I joked, "quit breathing so heavy." It was a lighthearted moment, but it didn't change the fact that we weren't getting the sound I wanted. We moved on to Good Luck Charm, a pop song that needed to be perfect. I told the band, if we goof up, just keep going. We had a few hiccups, but by the fourth take, we nailed it. The new single was in the can, and I could feel the energy in the room shift. Next up was Anything That's Part of You. It was a ballad, and I knew I had to get it right. I took my time, working through 6 takes as Floyd Kramer, our pianist, tried to match the demo. The song was so sad, and I felt every word. It was like I was living the lyrics, and by the end, I was exhausted but satisfied. We hit a snag with I Met Her Today. The song had some tricky jumps, and it took us 20 takes to get it right. We all knew we could do better, but we had to move on. The clock was ticking, and we had a lot of ground to cover. Night Rider was the last song of the night. We were tired, and no one could find the right groove. We ended up playing it fast, and even though take 3 became the master, we all knew it wasn't our best. But that's the life of a recording artist. Sometimes you have to settle for what you can get, and sometimes you have to push through the bad takes to find the good ones. The important thing is that we got the job done. The next day, we were back at it, this time for the soundtrack of a new movie called Kid Galahad. The pressure was on to find a hit, and the writers were working overtime to deliver. We spent hours in the studio, trying to get the right sound for songs like King of the Whole Wide World and A Whistling Tune. Some songs took 35 takes, but we never gave up. It wasn't just about making a movie. It was about making a hit. The Colonel, my manager, was always pushing for more, and the record company, RCA, was right there with him. They wanted a single from the movie, but the Colonel was stubborn. He didn't want to release a song from an album that was already out, and he was worried about cannibalizing sales. But in the end, they made a deal, and Can't Help Falling in Love became a massive hit. The success of Blue Hawaii and the single changed everything. We knew what worked, and we were ready to do it again. The formula was clear, a mix of ballads, up-tempo songs, and a little bit of everything in between. We were on a roll, and nothing was going to stop us. But the pressure was real. We had to keep delivering, and the writers had to keep writing. It was a never-ending cycle, and sometimes it felt like we were running in circles. But every time we hit the studio, we knew we had a chance to make something magic, and that's what we were there for, to make magic, to make music, to make history. I remember the excitement of those Nashville sessions in 1962. Paul Evans brought in a sweet ballad called Something Blue. It was a gentle tune based on the old wedding saying, something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. We tried it out, but it didn't really click. The band gave it a shot, but we ended up dropping it. Still, the musicians were amazing. They were the best in the business, and they played with a skill that most artists only dream of. Next we tackled Gonna Get Back Home Somehow, a moody rocker by Doc Pomus and Mort Schumann. The band dove into it with the same natural flow that had worked on the earlier ballad. Harold Bradley played a tic-tac rhythm, doubling the notes of Bob Moore's acoustic bass, but an octave higher. Grady Martin played both lead and rhythm guitar, trading off with Scotty Moore throughout the sessions. It was a perfect blend of instruments and vocals, creating a great pop record. Otis Blackwell and Winfield Scott were always a good team, and their song, Such an Easy Question, was no exception. It was a medium-tempo pop song with a touch of blues. Elvis put his own spin on it, making it playful and sexy. The arrangement of the instruments and vocals was carefully crafted, creating a solid single candidate. Bill Giant and Jeff Lewis added a Latin-flavored song called Fountain of Love. The song wasn't groundbreaking, but Elvis's voice sounded incredible. He commanded the song, showing off his vocal range like few other pop singers could. Grady Martin added some Spanish-style guitar picking, and Harold Bradley switched back to guitar. Boots Randolph played shakers and vibes, adding a nice touch to the mix. We also recorded Just for Old Time's Sake, a pretty ballad by Sid Tepper and Roy Bennett. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it gave Elvis a chance to show off some of the Dean Martin vocal techniques he had been studying. We tried to do Night Rider again, a song by Pomus and Schumann, but it didn't work out. The arrangement was too overwhelming, and we gave up after an hour of struggling. In the early morning hours, we brought out You'll Be Gone, a song inspired by Begin the Big Wine. It was a deep, passionate song, and Elvis threw himself into it. The Latinate arrangement added to the atmosphere, but the song was shelved for 3 years. It was the only song Elvis was ever seriously involved in writing. The next day, we started with I Feel That I've Known You Forever, a ballad by Doc Pomus and Alan Jeffries. It was a lovely song, but not quite strong enough to be a single. We then recorded Just Tell Her Jim Said Hello, a song by Leiber and Stoller. It had a memorable melody and a nice twist in the lyrics. We tried it at different tempos, but the mid-tempo arrangement worked best. However, there was an annoyingly loud triangle in the mix that disturbed the balance. One of the last songs we recorded was Suspicion, a rhythmic departure that had hit written all over it. Elvis saved the best for last. The song showcased his vocal tricks without ever becoming a parody. It was a perfect fit for his style. The final song was She's Not You, a collaboration by Leiber, Stoller, and Doc Pomus. Elvis sounded as sweet as honey, gliding through the recording with effortless intimacy. It was a model of unaffected intimacy, and Freddy Bienstock was thrilled with the material. As the sessions came to a close, we ordered lacquers of a single backing, Just Tell Her Jim Said Hello, with You'll Be Gone. The next big project was the soundtrack for Paramount's Girls, 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 in March 1962. Joe Lilly was the musical director, and Thorne Nogger was the engineer. The band included Scotty Moore, Tiny Timbrel, Barney Kessel, Robert Bain, Alton Hendrickson, Ray Siegel, and DJ Fontana. The Jordanaires and the Amigos provided the vocals. We kicked off with I Don't Want To and We're Common and Loaded, both by Otis Blackwell and Winfield Scott. Then we recorded Thanks to the Rolling Sea by Ruth Batchelor and Bob Roberts. The next day we did Where Do You Come From and Girls, Girls, Girls by Leiber and Stoller. Return to Sender was also by Blackwell and Scott, and it became the aside of a single. We continued with Because of Love by Batchelor and Roberts, and then The Walls Have Ears and Song of the Shrimp by Roy C. Bennett and Bob Roberts. A Boy Like Me, A Girl Like You by Sid Tepper and Roy C. Ben, it was next. The following day we recorded Mama and Earth Boy, both by Tepper and Bennett. We also did Dainty Little Moonbeams and Girls, 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 the finale for the double features. I Don't Wanna Be Tied by Giant, Baum, and Kay was the last song of the session. Otis Blackwell and Winfield Scott had been working on songs for the movie, but they only came up with 2 that fit. We're Common and Loaded, and a stab at a title song. Blackwell had a meeting with the Colonel and played Return to Sender for him. The Colonel loved it and said it would definitely go into the movie. The soundtrack had a mix of songs, including some not-so-great ones from Tepper and Bennett, and 2 very nice ballads from Batchelor and Roberts. When a birthday song was needed, Charles O'Curran and Dudley Brooks wrote Mama, but it didn't fit, so they wrote We'll Be Together instead. The band practiced before Elvis arrived, leaving him little chance to interact musically with them. Elvis's record sales were starting to slip. The Epps follow that dream, and Kid Galahad didn't do as well as expected. The Nashville sessions were supposed to provide the follow-up to Good Luck Charm. Elvis was initially confident about You'll Be Gone, but he eventually decided to shelve it. Instead, he chose She's Not You, and Just Tell Her Jim Said Hello as the next single. She's Not You got most of the radio attention, but the single only reached number 5, which was disappointing. The album Potluck did well, reaching number 4, but it didn't capture the top spot. This showed that studio album sales were leveling off. After the disappointing showing of Flaming Star and Wild in the Country, 20th Century, Fox decided not to work with Elvis anymore. The Mirish deal was reduced to 2 pictures instead of 4. The Colonel had to come up with something big. The deal with Paramount allowed Elvis to make 1 movie a year with another studio. So the Colonel went back to MGM. They had produced Jailhouse Rock, and were now interested in Elvis again, thanks to the success of Blue Hawaii. They agreed to a 4-year, 4-picture deal. At first, there was talk of a movie about Hank Williams, but Elvis and the Colonel dismissed the idea. It wouldn't have been profitable to use only Hank Williams songs. The new film, originally titled Take Me to the Fair, was a lightweight family story with plenty of songs. It wasn't as risque as the Paramount pictures, but it had the potential to reach a wider audience. I remember those days back in 1962, when we started working on the soundtrack for It Happened at the World's Fair. Freddy Bienstock, our song publisher, was under a lot of pressure. He had to keep pushing his writers to come up with good songs for Elvis, just like they did for Blue Hawaii and Girls, Girls, Girls. Leiber and Stoller, who used to write a lot for Elvis, were not as available anymore. They would only give us songs they had already written for other artists. Even worse, Doc Pomus and Mort Schumann, who were our golden team, were starting to run out of ideas. Elvis had really liked the 4 songs Don Robertson wrote for him the year before. Don sent us a new ballad called They Remind Me Too Much of You, and Freddie loved it so much he tried to get the producer, Ted Richmond, to write it into the movie. Elvis went through a ton of songs, including 10 by Don Robertson. There were 3 different versions of the title song, and Elvis chose Take Me to the Fair by Wise and Weissman. But when Ted Richmond heard the demos, he didn't like Elvis's choice and asked for more options. The recording sessions for the soundtrack were set for August 30th and September 22nd. To save money, only the Jordanaires, Scotty Moore, and DJ Fontana were flown to Hollywood. Don Robertson, who was one of Elvis's favorite writers, was asked to play piano and organ during the sessions. He had a special style called slip note that made his playing sound unique. Ben Weissman, another writer, helped out at the last minute with a new song called Happy Ending for the movie's finale. But Elvis had a cold, so the session was delayed for 2 days. When we finally started recording, Elvis still wasn't feeling great. We only managed to record 3 songs, Happy Ending, Relax by Tepper and Bennett, and an unsuccessful attempt at Take Me to the Fair. The rest of the soundtrack was postponed until late September. By then, the Jordanaires were unavailable, so we used a local group called the Mellow Men instead. The first thing we did was re-record Take Me to the Fair, but then the movie's title changed to highlight the Seattle World's Fair, and the song lost its title status. Even though it wasn't the title song anymore, it stayed in the movie. The way MGM recorded their movie soundtracks was different from how we usually did things. In Nashville, we used natural room sounds and tape echo to make the recordings sound really good. But MGM recorded their music very dry, without any echo. They also kept the sound very separated, with Elvis on one track, the instruments on another, and the backing vocals on a third. This made the recordings sound a bit flat, and less full-bodied compared to what we did in Nashville or at radio recorders. Don Robertson was there for the morning session, and he brought 2 beautiful ballads. The movie songs had to fit the plot, so they sometimes sounded a bit forced. But Don's songs were love songs that stood on their own. Elvis worked hard to get the feeling just right, taking 8 takes for I'm Falling in Love Tonight, and 9 for They Remind Me Too Much of You. Don even helped out by changing a part of the melody when someone thought it was too similar to another song. If Don hadn't been there, that song might have been thrown out. We moved on to the next few songs, which were okay but not great. Elvis lit up a cigarillo and laughed at the silly arrangement of How Would You Like to Be? We also recorded One Broken Heart for Sale, which had a catchy rhythm, but it didn't feel as special as some of Elvis's other songs. We wrapped up the session by recording Beyond the Bend and the remake of Take Me to the Fair. The next big project was the soundtrack for Fun in Acapulco in January 1963. Elvis was really motivated this time. The songs had a great Mexican flavor, and Elvis sang with a lot of energy. Don Robertson and Hal Blair visited a Spanish nightclub to get inspiration for their songs. They even hired a band to create full performances for Elvis and the group to copy. This worked well, and both I Think I'm Gonna Like It Here and Margarita were almost exact copies of Don's demos. Freddy had to dig into the labor and Stoller songbook to find Bossa Nova Baby, which fit the movie even though it was a Brazilian style. The soundtrack album for It Happened at the World's Fair was getting ready for release. The Colonel wanted a fancy gatefold cover, but RCA wanted to charge more for it. The Colonel wouldn't go for that, thinking it wasn't fair to the fans. The single One Broken Heart for Sale didn't do as well as expected, maybe because it was short and the sound wasn't as good. In May 1963, we went back to Nashville for more studio sessions. Elvis recorded a bunch of great songs, including Echoes of Love, Please Don't Drag That String Around, and You're the Devil in Disguise. We also did Never Ending, What Now, What Next, Where To, Witchcraft, and Finders Keepers, Losers Weepers. The next day we recorded Memphis, Tennessee, It's a Long Lonely Highway, Ask Me, and Western Union Speedway. Elvis was always trying to give his fans the best music he could, and these sessions were no different. Even though there were challenges, we always found a way to make it work. I remember the spring of 1963, when I headed to Nashville for my annual recording session with RCA. The Colonel always made sure this was a must-do event, and I always went in with high hopes. The recording studio was buzzing with energy, and the band was ready to go. We had an amazing lineup: Scotty Moore, Grady Martin, Jerry Kennedy, Harold Bradley, and others. The session started with a bunch of new songs from Freddy Bienstock's pile of demo records. It was a mix of everything, but sometimes the material just didn't hit the mark. The first song we tackled was Echoes of Love, written by Bob Roberts and Patty McMains. It was a nice tune, but it didn't really challenge me vocally. The band seemed to struggle with the pop feel, and it just didn't have that country, blues, or gospel touch I love. We moved on to Please Don't Drag That String Around by Otis Blackwell and Winfield Scott. It was a solid song, but it felt like a repeat of some of my earlier hits, like Return to Sender and One Broken Heart for Sale. The standout of the day was Devil in Disguise, written by Giant, Baum, and Kay. It had a soft opening that suddenly turned into full-blown rock and roll. Grady Martin's guitar work was incredible, and the band really got into it. It was a perfect mix of pop and rock, and I knew it would be a hit. We also did some covers like Witchcraft, an R&B hit by the Spiders. It wasn't as exciting as Devil in Disguise, but Boots Randolph's sax solo was a highlight. Other songs like Never Ending, Finders Keepers, Losers Weepers, and Love Me Tonight were okay, but they didn't really stand out. Love Me Tonight was the most ambitious, and I put a lot of passion into it, but it didn't connect with the current musical trends. We also recorded Maybelline, a Chuck Berry song I've been singing since the early days. It was a natural fit, and we got it done in just 2 takes. Long Lonely Highway by Pomus and Schumann also went smoothly, again in just 2 takes. Freddy Bienstock was always on the lookout for European songs, and he sent us Volare by Italian singer Domenico Modugno. We tried Ask Me, a reworked version, but it was tough to sing. I told the guys, this song will kill me, and we only managed 2 takes before moving on. Some songs were just not up to par. Western Union by Sid Tepper and Roy Ben. It was a rehash of Return to Sender and felt stale. We recorded it anyway, but it wasn't my favorite. Slowly But Surely by Sid Wayne and Ben Weissman had more life, thanks to Jerry Kennedy's fuzzy guitar, but it still didn't have the energy of the demo version by PJ Proby. At the end of the night, we worked on a half-finished song called Blue River. It was a quick take that we later extended for the release. We also revisited Ask Me, and the 6th take was chosen as the master, but I wasn't convinced it would be a hit. Despite the mixed results, I chose Devil in Disguise as the single, and it became a big hit, reaching number 3 on the charts. It even topped the charts in Denmark for 13 weeks. This success was a relief after the failure of One Broken Heart for Sale. A few months later, I was back in the studio, this time for the MGM movie Viva Las Vegas. The Colonel loved the idea of a glamorous Las Vegas setting, and we had a new set of songs to record. The team was a mix of familiar faces and some new ones. George Stoll was the musical director, and we had a great group of musicians, including Scotty Moore, Tiny Timbrel, and Billy Strange on guitar, Bob Moore on bass, and DJ Fontana on drums. We started with Nightlife and Come On Everybody, both of which were good fits for the movie. If You Think I Don't Need You by Red West and Joe Cooper had a Ray Charles feel, and it was a solid R&B number. We also recorded Viva Las Vegas, the movie's title track, which became a classic over time. The band and I really got into it, and it matched the excitement of the city. One of the standout moments was You're the Boss by Labor and Stoller, which I sang as a duet with Anne Margaret. We both put in seductive performances, but for some reason it didn't make the final cut of the movie. We also did I Need Somebody to Lean On, another great song by Pomus and Schumann, which captured the feeling of late-night Las Vegas. At the end of August, we needed one more up-tempo song for the movie. I decided to record What I Say by Ray Charles. It was a fun, energetic song, but it didn't quite capture the same soul as Ray's original. We also recorded If You Think I Don't Need You and I Need Somebody to Lean On, which were both solid additions to the soundtrack. The Colonel had plans for more albums, including a soundtrack for Fun in Acapulco and a new Golden Records album. The Fun in Acapulco soundtrack included all the songs from the movie plus a couple of bonus tracks, Love Me Tonight and Slowly But Surely. The idea was to give fans more value for their money. Later that year, we recorded the soundtrack for Kissin' Cousins in Nashville and Hollywood. The band was top-notch, and we had some great songs including Bossa Nova Baby and Memphis, Tennessee. The sessions were smooth, and we wrapped up with a solid soundtrack. Those recording sessions were a mix of hits and misses, but they kept me busy and connected with my fans. The Colonel always had a plan, and even when things didn't go as smoothly as we hoped, we always found a way to make it work. I remember those days in 1964, like it was yesterday. It was a time when everything seemed to be changing, and I was right in the middle of it. The movie Kissin' Cousins was on the horizon, and the Colonel, my manager, was obsessed with keeping costs down. He decided that instead of recording in Hollywood, we should go back to Nashville. It was supposed to be more economical and efficient. But it wasn't just about money. It was also about the sound. The Colonel wanted to get that hillbilly feel, and Nashville seemed like the place to do it. We started working on the songs for Kissin' Cousins in Nashville, but things didn't go as smoothly as we hoped. I caught a cold, so we had to record the backing tracks without me. The plan was for me to overdub my vocals later in Los Angeles. It was a bit of a hassle, but we got through it. The songs were a mix of different styles, and I had to sing in 2 different voices for the title track to make it sound like a duet between my character and his hillbilly cousin. It was a bit of a challenge, but I pulled it off. The recording sessions were intense. We had to work quickly, and the Colonel was always watching the clock. The sound was better than the previous MGM recordings, but it still didn't have that spark we were looking for. Despite the challenges, we managed to get through all the songs, and the album was released in 1964. Around the same time, the single Bossa Nova Baby was doing well, but it was a double-edged sword. The B-side, Witchcraft, was also a hit, and it seemed like the B-side was cutting into the A-side's success. The album Fun in Acapulco was also set to release, and the Colonel was already thinking ahead to the next projects. One night in January 1964, I decided to go back to the studio to re-record some songs I wasn't happy with. I rode my motorcycle to RCA Studios in Nashville, feeling determined. I ordered some food and waited for everyone to get ready. Once we started, we went through Memphis, Tennessee, and Ask Me with a new energy. We even managed to record a new song, It Hurts Me, in just 15 minutes. I was really happy with how it turned out. It was one of my best performances, and I felt like I was back on top. But things didn't stay that way for long. The songs I recorded that night didn't get the attention they deserved. It Hurts Me ended up as the B-side to Kissin' Cousins, and Memphis, Tennessee was overshadowed by Lonnie Mac's instrumental version. It was a bit of a disappointment, but I knew the Colonel was always looking for the next big hit. The Colonel's strategy was to focus on soundtrack albums and hit collections. He believed that greatest hits records would sell better than new studio material. So, the songs I recorded in May 1963 got shelved. They were eventually used as filler for other albums and B-sides. It was a bit frustrating, but I understood that the Colonel was always thinking about the bottom line. In March 1964, we started working on the soundtrack for Roustabout. The sessions were intense, and we had to work quickly. We recorded a bunch of songs, and I had to sing in different styles again. It was a lot of work, but I enjoyed it. The Colonel was always there, making sure everything went according to plan. By the end of 1964, I was spending more and more time in Hollywood. The Colonel had me working on movie after movie, and it was starting to feel like a grind, but I knew it was part of the deal. The movies were bringing in a lot of money, and the soundtrack albums were doing well. It was a different kind of success, but it was success nonetheless. Looking back, those years were a mix of highs and lows. I was still making music, but the focus was shifting. The Colonel was always thinking about the next big thing, and I was trying to stay true to my art. It was a balancing act, and sometimes I felt like I was losing myself in the process. But I kept going because that's what I had to do. I remember the times when I was in the studio, laying down tracks for my movies. It was a whirlwind, but it was all part of the plan. The Colonel, my manager, was always thinking ahead, making sure there was always something new to promote. Every time a new movie came out, the marketing machine would kick into gear. Sheet music would be printed, and RCA and the movie companies would work together to keep my name on everyone's lips. It was a good business for the movie companies. They didn't have to spend much money to make an Elvis movie. I'd get paid between $225,000 and $1 million for each picture, plus a 50% share of the profits. The movies were quick to make, sometimes in just a few weeks, and the sets were often reused to save money. The music for the soundtracks was recorded in less than 2 weeks. For less than $2 million, a movie could easily make $4 million in the US alone, and even more in foreign markets. By January 1964, the movies and their soundtracks were piling up. Over the next 2 years, the movie companies released 7 more Elvis movies. Each one had its own radio commercials, promotions, and press stories. They would link me with my latest co-star to keep the gossip going. It was a never-ending cycle, and it worked. As someone from MGM once said, "They don't need titles. They could be numbered. They would still sell." The movies didn't really need specific songs. The plots were so simple that any song could fit. But the Colonel and Freddy Bienstock, who ran the publishing company, made sure that all the songs were controlled by either Elvis Presley music or Gladys music. This meant more money for me, about $400,000 in 1965 alone. But it also meant that some of the best songwriters stopped writing for me. They had to give up a third of their royalties, and sometimes their songs were rejected. Otis Blackwell, who wrote Devil in Disguise, even wrote a song for Roustabout, but it was replaced by a song from Giant, Baum, and Kay. Giant, Baum, and Kay wrote a lot of the songs for my movies. They wrote 22 songs in 2 years, which is a lot. It was hard for them to keep everything fresh and interesting. Ben Weissman, another songwriter, had to write a song about a dog for Paradise Hawaiian Style. He said, "What do you do if they insist on a song about a dog? You either do it or someone else will." When the regular studio session stopped, RCA, my record label, lost control over my career. The movie companies, guided by the Colonel, would send RCA everything they needed for each new album. RCA just had to coordinate the release with the movie, follow the Colonel's instructions, and collect the checks. It was a well-oiled machine, and it kept me in the spotlight. Elvis and I, along with our friends, were trying to keep his music alive, even when it seemed like the world had moved on. RCA was struggling to keep Elvis on top, but things weren't the same. His singles weren't selling like they used to, and the albums weren't doing much better. RCA thought the solution was to release more records, but it just made things worse. Elvis's new songs were competing with his old ones, and it was a mess. In 1964, RCA released a bunch of singles, hoping to boost sales, but it didn't work. Kiss and Cousins did okay, but What I Say and Viva Las Vegas bombed. RCA even tried to rush out Suspicion to compete with Terry Stafford's version, but it was too late. Such a Night and Ask Me were a little better, but not by much. RCA even reissued Blue Christmas from 1957, but it didn't do much for the charts. The albums weren't doing much better. In 1964, RCA released only 2 new albums, plus a Viva Las Vegas EP. Roustabout made it to number 1, but it didn't sell as well as they hoped. The next year, 1965, was even worse. Elvis and the Colonel only delivered 3 soundtrack albums, a Tickle Me EP, and a couple of singles with old songs. Do the Clam was a disaster, but Crying in the Chapel from 1960 was a surprise hit. It sold 1 million copies and hit number 3 in the US and number 1 in the UK. The next singles, Easy Question and I'm Yours, did okay, but they were old songs from 1962. RCA tried to make a comeback with Tell Me Why, but it didn't work. The movie soundtracks Girl Happy and Harum Skarum didn't do much either. RCA had to resort to making an anniversary album, which they called Elvis for Everyone. It was a collection of leftover songs from the past, and it didn't sell well. Elvis was getting frustrated. He complained about the material, sometimes left sessions early, and even made jokes about the songs he had to sing. He'd lean against the wall, so far from the microphone that the engineers had to use soundboards to pick up his voice. It was clear he didn't want to be there, but he always finished the job. The Colonel was still in control, but he knew things needed to change. He renegotiated Elvis's contract, getting bigger payments and bonuses for himself. RCA was running out of good material, so they had to wait for the Colonel to schedule new movies and soundtracks. In 1966, RCA sent Elvis a birthday telegram trying to boost his spirits. They wanted to make 1966 the best year yet. Harry Jenkins, the Colonel's new partner, started to raise concerns about Elvis's declining career. They couldn't keep releasing mediocre soundtracks and expect to do well. The first project was the Spin Out soundtrack, but after that, they planned a new religious album. The Colonel also wanted new pop singles and a Christmas record, hoping to capitalize on the seasonal market. Elvis was still making music at home, though. Red West bought 2 tape recorders, and Charlie Hodge moved in to work for Elvis again. They'd record demos with friends, and sometimes Glenn Campbell would play guitar. They'd sing gospel songs, old standards, and even contemporary hits. It was a way for Elvis to make the music he loved, away from the pressure of Hollywood. One day, I remember Elvis, Charlie, and Red singing, "Show Me Thy Ways, O Lord," and "Oh How I Love Jesus." It felt like a true moment of peace. They'd also play around with old country songs, and even try out new tunes like "What Now My Love" and "Blowin' in the Wind." It was a different side of Elvis, one that wasn't driven by the need to make a hit. These home recordings were a glimpse into Elvis's real passion for music. He'd sing bass, and Charlie would take the lead. Sometimes they'd invite friends to join in, and it felt like a real band. They even tried to put lyrics to Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, thinking it might be a future hit. It was a far cry from the studio sessions, but it was where Elvis found his true voice. The Colonel and RCA were planning big things for 1966, but for Elvis, the real magic was happening at home. As I walked into the studio that night, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. Things were changing, and I knew it. A new producer, Felton Jarvis, was there to guide us. I had no idea back then, but Felton and I had a history. He was born the same year as me, and he had seen me perform when I was just starting out. He was a big fan, and that made me feel a bit more at ease. The studio was packed with people from the music business. Freddy Bienstock and Lamar Fike were there for Hill and Range. Tom Diskin was representing the Colonel, and Harry Jenkins from RCA was making sure everything went smoothly. It was a big deal, and everyone knew it. Jim Malloy, the new engineer, had also met me before. He was from Los Angeles, and had worked with me back in the day. Now he was in Nashville, and we were all working together again. He had a calm presence that helped keep the tension down. There were a lot of new faces in the band, too. Scotty Moore brought in a young guitarist named Chip Young, and we had Pete Drake on steel guitar, Rufus Long on sax, and some new singers June Page and Dolores Edgen. The Imperials, led by Jake Hess, were also there. It was like a dream team of musicians. I started the session by singing some gospel numbers with everyone, just to warm up. We joked and shared stories, and before we knew it, hours had passed. When we finally started on the first song, Run On, the energy was electric. We began softly with Floyd Kramer's piano, and then the whole group joined in. I missed my lead in the first time, but the second take was perfect. Everyone was swinging, and it was a powerful, joyful sound. The next song, How Great Thou Art, was something special. Charlie had played me a version by the Sons of the Pioneers, and I had practiced it for months. I knew the song inside and out. Before we recorded it, I gave the group a quick 15-minute rehearsal and explained how I wanted it to sound. I took every part of the 4-part vocal, from the deep bass to the high notes. It was like I was a one-man quartet, and it felt amazing. When we started the final take, I sang with all my heart. The slower tempo gave the song a deep spiritual feel, and I could feel the power of the music building up. It was a moment I'll never forget, and it became one of the highlights of my career. Those nights in the studio were some of the best I ever had. We recorded a mix of gospel and pop songs, and it all came together beautifully. Felton and Jim were great to work with, and the musicians were top-notch. It was a perfect blend of new and old, and I couldn't have been happier with the results. Those sessions in May 1966 were a turning point for me. They showed that no matter how much time passed, the music was still the most important thing. And with the right people around, anything was possible.